Pencil Kings, 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 Pencil Kings.
All right, we're back. Once again, this is the Pencil Kings podcast. And if you're new, we are at pencilkings.com, where we find artists all over the world, find out what they're really great at. We get them to reveal their secrets to us, and then we release those secrets to our members. And today I'm excited because we're going to talk to one of our members. His name is Chaz Sutherland. And do you go by Chaz? Is Chaz your real name?
Well, it's a nickname.
Okay,
So
that's what I
it's
thought. I was like, well, I don't know. I've met people with all kinds of names, but
yeah, sure,
let me just
Charles. So
okay. So let me just tell the story first. So last year we did this thing called the sketching challenge, and the idea behind it was just to have something where we took away the need to perform at a high level. So instead of saying like, oh, you have to draw all these things perfectly or follow along with this expert example, it was just no, there's no expectations. The only expectation was that you draw something every day, even if it was just a single line on a page. I don't think anybody actually did that. But it was just like do something visual and creative every single day for 21 days in a row. So we did this. Some people did very simple things. Some people did more involved things. And then Chess came along, and I don't know how much time you were spending on these, and we'll get into that. But I feel like with that original group, you just raised the bar to this ridiculously high level. I was like, okay, who is this guy? I need to talk to him. It's amazing that there's people inside the community like you with so much experience and just amazing talent. So welcome, Chaz, to the call, and I'm glad to have you here. And before we get into that, why don't you tell people like the sort of, I guess, the 1 minute overview which I've been getting people to do of where you're at right now and what you're working on.
thank you. I'm glad to be here. Well, I've just moved to Corona, California, so I'm settling in and trying to find work. So I'm working on my portfolio and trying to expand my knowledge in both 3D and 2D. So I like to work in things like ZBrush, Maya, as well as visual effects. I just purchased Maya so I could work in the Bifrost system and play around with that. So right now it's more sort of just poking around and seeing what I can do, and hopefully that'll lead to some employment real soon.
But just to clarify things, like you're looking for employment because you moved. It's not because you're new. Like you have worked in various positions for quite a while, correct?
Correct. I certainly don't want to give away my age, but yeah, I started way back in the 90s, and I've worked for companies like Electronic Arts and Shiny Entertainment, a few startups as well as some work in the independent film market.
All right. So you've been around. Seen the technology grow. I think the 90s. I feel like that was an explosion in technology. Like there was definitely the Xbox consoles that were happening then, which was a huge leap forward compared to what was before.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, remember arguments with buddies of mine when technology sort of started to rear its head and started taking notice. And there was a demarcation at that point. At first, I resisted it. I didn't think computers were going to go as far as they've gone. And then I started seeing more of it in the movies. And each time a new movie or TV show came out, the amount of quality was increasing exponentially. So that's when I realized, oh, I got to learn how to do this. And so I haven't looked back really.
So I think where you're at is kind of an interesting place that we can talk about a little bit. I'm sure there's some things that we'll learn and through talking about it. So when you have some experience under your belt, or in your case, you have quite a bit of experience, but I feel like a lot of people are in the same boat where they move or something changes or they have to move back home. And it's sort of, do you feel like you're in a reinventing yourself stage right now, or is it just more of the same of what you've been doing?
Oh yeah, I even felt like that when I was working. That I had to constantly keep up with not just technology, but the technology was feeding the quality bar. I remember struggling to find just any kind of inspiring image back in the 80s, early 90s. It was difficult. So we'd go to comic books, of course, the movies and things like that, but it's not even close to what's available to people today with the internet and the sheer population of, I mean, great art that's being created it's overwhelming. So if you're not paying attention to that, you can drown in it really quick. So I've never ever taken a rest. It kind of drives my wife crazy, but I just don't feel like you can. It's not bad in any sense. It's just remaining conscious of what's going on.
Right. And when you say like back before that it was hard to find reference image, is that like for the work that you were doing? I know when I was deep in production, it was so often Aliens was the thing that got referenced. It was like, make it like Aliens, the sort of gritty sci-fi. I guess we were working on a lot of gritty sci-fi things. But is that what you mean? And then today there's kind of almost too much, and you're kind of feel like you're constantly churning to keep up with everything?
Yeah, it's back then it was everything was of course referencing whatever the latest greatest film was out. I mean, when Terminator launched, I mean that right there, the whole exo or endoskeleton thing became really popular. You started seeing chrome skulls everywhere. I mean, tattoo parts. it was crazy, but I want to date myself here, but I remember going to see the original Star Wars back in '77. And I remember what it was like before and what it was like after. And after, everybody was asking, I was a kid then, so I don't know what was going on in the professional market, but even down in, as us as kids, we referenced everything was to Star Wars at that point. Then Empire came out and Blade Runner for the more sophisticated geek. But it was always some kind of film. Not even comic books, got referenced that much. Comic books were referencing the movies, I think. More so than anything. There was a company called Paper Tiger that produced art books. Every once in a while, you could maybe find one in a bookstore, but those were rare, and they got gobbled up pretty quick. Not to mention any kind of comic book that had any kind of significance. Take, for instance, when the X-Men switched to the Uncanny, not many people bought those, and so trying to go back and find a copy of that was almost impossible. And the prices, for these things, added to the collectability market. It was all very, self-feeding, I guess, for lack of a better term, and but very, very concentrated, and that made it very, very dense and hard to penetrate sometimes. And to think about it being that way even now is kind of bewildering to me because it's just so easy to access imagery.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this idea of reinventing yourself or constantly working to or striving to achieve, because I feel like for me, I'm going through a reinventing period, and it's definitely not an art thing. It's more of just a personal that I don't know what is going to come out of this, but it's sort of like this phoenix brooding thing happening right now. But for you, with your art, and I feel that we're just right in the middle of a technology shift with, at least for games, with PlayStation 4 and Xbox One coming out fairly recently. And then on the visual effects side, I'm not sure what the big breakthroughs in technology. I know obviously Frozen comes out and now we can do digital snow, but I'm sure that computers are getting faster, so that means rendering times are going down and you can try out a lot more variations of things, and that's always good for iterating faster. But what do you see or what do you feel? And I'm really curious because you have obviously a lot of experience, and where are you taking it, or what are you excited about for where you're at?
I'm excited about seeing more dynamics and simulation entering, real-time environments, whether it's video games or they brought all the VFX guys together in Redwood Shores. And one of the gentlemen there, I apologize for not remembering his name, mentioned, one day we're not going to even have polygons. It's all going to be particles, So that's always I've kept that in my mind because we try to simulate real life through our technology and artwork. And so that's being constantly, I think, pursued, maybe not consciously, but it's happening as basically polygon counts have gone insane since things like ZBrush, right? Before that, it was like, I mean, if you saw 1,000 polys on a character, that was crazy, you know. And now you pull up something on the screen, and it's got 35 million on average or something ridiculous. So, and that number is just going to keep going up eventually to the point where, well, we're just going to go ahead and start painting vertices, you know. That's where I would like to see it to go. Makes my contributions to this industry a little bit more significant, I think.
In what way? Like, I'm curious, because, and especially from the viewpoint of someone who's maybe just starting or just getting into this, that they don't have all the experience. They're not able to look back. They just see the tools that they have today, and they're like, "What do you mean? Why would that be so exciting that you could just work in vertices and that there would be no more barrier between you and the tools?" I guess is the really exciting thing.
Well, if anyone's used anything like a sculpting program where you can just freely push your pen, if you have a pen tablet of some sort, across the surface, and you get a reaction from the computation that reflects what you're trying to do. If that keeps going in the direction that it's going, then eventually what we're going to be getting to is, I think, like I said, no polygons at all. PTEX has a format that came out of PTEX is a format that came out of Disney for texturing without texture maps. You know, these kind of systems, I think, are basically eliminating the barriers between the artist and the finished product. It used to be very, very technical back in the day, where you were pushing verts, you know, one by one. You were putting in an X, Y, and Z axis. So if you look at the stuff from the 80s, none of that stuff was done even with a mouse. It was done computationally with a keyboard. Eventually, the mouse replaced that. The pad replaced the mouse. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what the next step is going to be. But I'm excited for it, for whatever it is. And I think it's going to always be more for less input, if that makes sense.
More for less input. Yeah. Oh, definitely. I feel like eventually it will get to the point where you just think, you know, I feel like all artists can relate to the feeling of having an image in your mind and then not your hand not being able to create what's in your mind, and that barrier will be removed. You won't even use your hands. It will just be like, okay, you're only limited by your imagination. And then all of a sudden, all those, you know, oh, you have to put in 10,000 hours of mileage and all this stuff. Just like, no, you know, if you're insanely creative, these tools just think it. It's done.
Right. And I think the most important thing, and what will always separate the artist from sort of the layman in those situations, is the artist realize that mistakes still reside in the piece that's created. Someone who isn't trained won't pursue it to perfection, if you will. Not that that's ever achievable, but it's certainly a direction that a lot of us try to go and get something so that's presentable in a more professional format. So you got to learn things like anatomy and all that kind of stuff still. Because if you are correct and they do have that sort of like direct output from the brain, you're going to see a lot of junk, you know, I mean, a lot of junk. But that would provide the artist a fast to fail situation. So the faster you fail, the quicker you succeed, because you can iterate much quicker. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Oh, definitely. And one of the things that always stuck with me was, I forget who had said it, but if you study the history of art, or if you go to Europe where you can see a lot of these amazing sculptures all over the place, you have to realize that there was like hundreds or thousands of craftsmen or artisans or whatever you want to call them that were putting together these sculptures. And then there were the Leonardos and the Michelangelos. And these people were like amazing. These no-name sculptors were amazing. But there was still like another level that you could go to. And these are the people that history remembers. So.
Yeah. And, you know, pretty much people back then were the computers and the tools for those great men and great artists of the time. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that, you know, things like David wasn't sculpted purely by Michelangelo, that he had a whole army of artisans that would come in, and he would lay down the groundwork and get the form correct, and then they'd go in and do all the polishing and things like that.
Really?
Yeah, I would have to look into it, or if anybody wants to, and let me know if that's true or not. It makes sense because if you look at the sheer number of sculptures and things achieved by these guys back then, I find it hard to believe that only one person could do all of that. They had to sleep and eat at some time, and that's what the computer has done for us. Tools in general, and the computer, that's all it is. It's a tool. It just allows you to do more and more.
I think, well, just going off of what we've just been talking about, if you think about it, you could create I'm going to argue anyway. Somebody, I'm sure, can prove me wrong. But anyway, you could create a more detailed David statue. You could have it 3D printed. I don't know if they have life-size 3D printers yet, but eventually they will, if they don't already. And you could just print it out. And then so one person could have this done in a week. I'm not sure how long the original David took, but I doubt it was a week.
Yeah, I doubt so as well. It had to take some time. If you've ever seen any of these statues, they're incredibly detailed and very complex. And even then, I think there's a separation in the development of the actual idea to the point that you actually begin on something. So if we allowed a 3D printer to simply just take over, it doesn't admonish the amount of work that went into it beforehand.
So going back to this, I'm just going to keep going back to this idea of reinventing yourself or someone's self. When you have a lot of experience, are you now focusing on one thing and saying that you're trying to present yourself as a blank artist, whatever that is, like a 3D artist, or only as an art director, or only as a mobile games artist? Are you kind of specializing like that, or are you still going broad? Because I feel like there's pluses and minuses to both directions, but just for where you're at right now, I feel like you could make a conscious decision on it if you wanted to.
Yes, absolutely. Right now I have been concentrating on just two things, and that's my illustrating skills and my visual effects skills. And so I dabble in other smaller things just every once in a while to sort of break my brain loose if I get stuck, meaning I'll pop open Maya and start messing around with something in 3D for a little while. But it's more of a doodle at that point. I just kind of let go of it and then go back to work, learning to draw and learning my visual effects tools a little bit more.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to pick that apart a little bit.
Sure.
And just get your thoughts on it. Because I've been going back and forth with another member about what you should study and how you should focus. And I feel like the more that you can focus and know what you want to do, the better off you're going to be. So I would say that obviously, the more that you spend doing art of any kind, it's going to help because it all kind of like spills out into other things. However, focusing on illustration and focusing on visual effects, I would argue that those are two they're very far apart. Like if you were saying I'm focused on illustration and storyboarding, I would say that those are more related, or you could go either way. So what are your thoughts about being in these two fairly separate realms?
Well, first let me say I agree with you. The more focus you put into one area, the faster you're going to learn it. But I think there's also different personality types. I don't want to go into like how the brain works or anything like that. But I think it's safe to say that a lot of us just simply process information differently from other people.
Yeah.
And I would say my mind can't really stay on one task for like weeks on end. Like my wife, she can do that. And it's amazing to me. I'm the type that I'll work on something and then I'm very intense and then I need a break from it. But I don't want to lose time to sort of just latency and idleness. And so I try to fill that space up with, rather than a trip to Hawaii, if you will, which would be nice. I'll jump to the other thing that has my brain operating in a different manner. I was not strong in math growing up, but I find myself absorbing it a lot easier now than I ever did as a youngster. And that's probably, holy crap, I just said youngster, didn't I? Well, anyways, I think it's just because of my willingness to learn it, is a big part of it. Um, However, that willingness only takes me so far, and my brain just gets to a point where it's just like, oh, please, no more, give me a break. And so that's when I switch.
Oh, that makes sense. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. That, and you have more or less like full time that you can work on this, or are you
Yeah,
doing other things as well?
I do this full time. My only sort of non-artistic hobby is cycling. So, and that's the break from everything.
Right. No, so that definitely makes sense. That, like, if you were, a lot of people are at school and they're studying all these different subjects, and then they have their free time where they can really focus in on the thing that they want to do with their art. But if you took that away and it was all of your time that you could focus on art, then I really see how these two. I mean, it could be anything, but it really makes sense to break it up. For myself, what I found is that I can focus intently. Like if I'm really being honest, I can only work about 4 hours a day before my brain starts to just turn to mush. Like really intense thinking or writing, something that requires a lot of focus. And after those 4 hours, like, nope, it's time to do calls or emailing or sketching or something else because the brain's just, it's tired.
Yeah,
It needs to switch.
I think that's exactly what's happening with a lot of people. I've met those people. I mean, that can just stay there, and I've always envied that. But there just came a point in my life, and I tried to pursue that. I would liquefy my soul, my brain onto the desk from days on end of trying to be that person. And it just, when you just realize, okay, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, and I can work within these boundaries, I think you can still maximize your potential in the same manner that anyone else can. And you'll eventually, it's sort of a linear curve versus the fast in, fast out curve, right? They both arrive at the same point at the same time. They just seem to have a different type of motion to them. And I think that's what this is.
Oh, completely. Like, I feel that when I had my sort of art director role, I never really felt completely comfortable with it. I felt like I didn't deserve the title, but I didn't understand why I was great at it. And I was great at it because I could switch gears really quickly. I could look at all these art assets and say, like, fix this, change that, do this thing over here, and I could keep all those conversations in my head so that next time I looked at the asset, I would remember what I said last time and be able to continue it forward and help the artist make progress. And at the same time, I was insanely organized. So having my head buried in Excel and managing all these email conversations, I was able to juggle all those balls at the same time. So could I sit for 40 hours and create the next piece of box art, concept art that was going to sell a concept? No way. But could I enable a team of like 40 or 50 artists to be 10% or 20% better? Definitely. And so that's where I was really good at that. And it's just, playing to your strengths, just like what you were talking about.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up the art director thing because I think that was, something I thought I always wanted to do. And I think for the wrong reasons. Sometimes people want to, I shouldn't say for myself, I wanted to pursue something for the sake of pursuing it because it seemed to have a higher status and more importance than just being a sort of ground level craftsman. And when you get into that moment where you're really getting into knowing yourself, and which is more about admitting things, you come to realize, well, okay, maybe that's not the right direction for me. So when that moment happens, suddenly a lot of free time seems to be available because you're no longer putting your energy into these sort of areas that you're not prepared for at the moment. It's not to say that you're not going to reach it one day, but maybe just at this moment you're not ready for it and you need to do a little bit more in these other areas that require some, focus. And if I can go back to the earlier part of our conversation when you were talking about focus versus sort of jumping around, I would just tell anybody what I tell myself, and that's just do whatever it takes to get it done. That's the commitment right there. It's not imitating anyone or any type of approach. It's finding the one that works for you, and that takes a level of commitment.
Let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit because lately, I've thought a lot about burnout and what allowed me to progress and where some people get roadblocked. And what I've come back to is that the things that are fun. I feel like there's a place for academic study, and then there's also a place for fun. And that if you follow the fun, that can get you over the hurdle in the beginning, where you can start to realize, like, hey, I'm not really getting to where I want to be, but I'm having fun, but I'm not where I want to be. I need to pile on some of the academic study. And so for you, what you were just saying, like being willing to do what you need to do to get it done, um, I feel like they're similar, but they're not the same thing. And so with what I just said and the idea of doing what you need to do to get it done and finding what works for you, do you have any tips? Because for me, it just I've been telling people to sort of like follow what's fun for you, and I feel like that's great advice at the beginning stages. But when you as you progress, you need to start being able to look at your own work critically, or be able to show it to people who are a little bit advanced from you, and get some insight into where you should go. But then you also have to know how you learn, and be able to it's almost like this gut feeling or something, and I'm not sure how to verbalize it so that I could give this as advice to somebody. But there's some kind of like feeling like you're in not and it's not being in flow. I feel like it's something different than that.
Well, fun is definitely a good entry point, like you mentioned, and I completely agree with that. You got to find something that you enjoy to do, otherwise it's just going to be work, and no one really likes work. So, but there's a point, human nature is to habituate even the best of things. We just get numb to it after a while, right? And so the fun isn't going to move you anymore. So understanding where your fulfillment's going to be, I think, is a huge factor in getting past that. Because when something's fulfilling, it doesn't have to be fun. There's something much more enriching that's occurring there. And as long as you have your eye on that, I think it'll pull you forward, because it'll in the darkest tunnels, it'll always be the light at the end of it, and hopefully not a train coming at you. Um, but I'm not trying. I apologize if this is getting really philosophical, but these are all very sort of like intangibles that we're trying to put words to, and they're the only words I've got for this at this moment. For me, I love to create something that I can share with others. There was a point in the beginning where I just loved to draw. I loved to doodle, but eventually that faded, and I found myself not wanting to draw. Then someone pick up a sketchbook and say, "Oh, you're pretty good," and then I start drawing pictures for that person, and that kept me going. Eventually, your audience loses its, there's no name to it. It's just the people out there, and you got to be willing to sort of take the bricks that are going to be tossed at you too, if you're going to share it with the world. But because they're going to come, and you got to have some thick skin. But if it's a fulfilling thing for you, then it won't matter what people are saying about it. Did that answer your question?
Kind of, but like I think what you said was great, and that's another piece of the puzzle is the fulfillment. I was just more interested in the idea of so you're past fun, and then what you were talking about was forget the exact words that you used, but I know that it was past fun. Okay, I feel like the fulfillment is a really important part, and that's something definitely that I can relate to that was there for a long time. Just the idea of creating something and the challenge of figuring out how a lot of this stuff was made. I feel like, especially in 3D, it was very interesting.
Yeah, and the puzzle aspect of a project can be very fulfilling to the people who want to pursue that. It's just sometimes you're not realizing that's what you want, right? You just find some enjoyment out of it. But solving the same old puzzle eventually sort of gets dull. And I think art is, in a way, it's like a puzzle. Each time you go in to try to figure out how to get what's in your mind onto your medium, becomes a puzzle. And there's frustration and anger and all sorts of other emotional, boundaries and obstacles to overcome to get to that. But if it's truly fulfilling, you'll always pursue it. I've known artists that, geez, they are your prototypical throwing the paint at the canvas type people. They don't want to do anything with the world, and but they get a great deal of fulfillment of what they do, and they're willing to work that minimum wage job so that they can afford just that little bit of paint that they can throw at the canvas each week. And my hat's off to that. Mine's a little bit more complex, so maybe selfish even.
Yeah, well, just when you said that, it put a big smile on my face, both of thinking of the people in my world that are like that, but also just people that are doing the thing that they want to do. And something that I'm always envious of when somebody finds that hobby or that pastime or that pursuit where they're fully engaged. I just always have my hat off to those people, and wish that there was more of that in the world of people who are really switched on, because I feel like a lot of people aren't. And it's not easy to find the thing that turns you on. We have so many options and opportunities these days. All right, Chaz, why don't we wrap this up? Do you have any last words of wisdom? I feel like there's a lot of experience and you've seen a lot of things come and go. Any advice to people listening? Our conversation kind of went all over the place. I don't think we've had such a deep philosophical conversation as this one before, but it's good. It's really helping me to crystallize the advice that I've been trying to put words to and that I just spend a lot of time thinking about, so that I can hopefully empower other people to take up the pencil or the paintbrush or the tablet or whatever it is and just enjoy it. It's really my mission. So I thank you for helping me with that.
Well, you're very welcome. I guess I would just like to leave it as there's going to be a lot of doubters and naysayers out there, and you just shouldn't be one of them.
For yourself or to other people, or can you clarify a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant that, there's going to be a lot of people out there that can tell you that you can't do it, that you shouldn't be doing it, that you shouldn't even enjoy it, and you shouldn't be one of those people. If you really want to do something, then do it. Mm-hmm. And art is one of those things that we've seen go from, anybody who decided this to pursue this line of work was not going to get work. They'd be the starving artist for the rest of their life, to, an industry just chock full of very specialized art types, so there's something there for you. If you really want to do it, just find it.
Awesome. Well, we will have show notes from this over at pencilkings.com/podcast, and we will have a link to Chaz's site. I know, Chaz, you're working on it, so we'll get the updated link and make sure that it's there for everybody. Unless you have a website already?
I do not at this moment. It's being worked on, and hope to have it launched within a month.
All right. So, yeah, by the time you go and check this out, we'll have the link there for you. So thank you so much, Chaz. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you being one of the guiding lights inside of the community for people to look up to and aspire to be like.
You're very welcome, and likewise. Thank you.
Demands patience, skill, years of practice.
Ah, you talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.